February 10th, 2002. Ramon Arellano. Felix walks through a Mazatlan carnival crowd hunting his biggest rival. Then his own underling calls his name. He turns. The bullets are already on the way. These are 12 times cartel bosses, and mob kingpins were killed by their own bodyguards and hitmen, men who were paid and trusted specifically to keep them alive. For nearly 2 decades, Ramon Arellano Felix was the most feared enforcer in Mexico, running the assassination wing of the Tijuana cartel alongside his brothers, known as a man with no conscience who would kill you for looking at him the wrong way. The FBI put him on its 10 most wanted list in 1997, but by then El Chapo Guzman had escaped to Mexican prison and joined forces with Ismael El Mayo Zambada to wipe out the entire Arellano Felix organization. The two Sinaloa bosses had years of grievances, so they reached inside Ramon's own cartel and turned one of his trusted underlings, Carlos Terrazas Lizarraga. According to journalist Annabel Hernandez, Sinaloa operatives kidnapped Terrazas' sister to force his cooperation. Terrazas then fed his boss false intelligence. El Mayo Zambada, he said, would be at the Mazatlan Carnival with only 2 bodyguards, an easy kill shot at the most powerful man in Mexico. Ramon took the bait. On February 10th, 2002, he and his personal bodyguard, known as Alhambra, slipped into the carnival crowd carrying pistols, scanning for Zambada, while Terrazas walked beside them, supposedly covering their escape. Instead, Terrazas shouted Ramon's name. Ramon turned. 2 Sinaloa gunmen came up from behind and opened fire, and Ramon and his bodyguard collapsed on the sidewalk among the carnival floats. He was 37. The Mexican government covered the killing for years as a botched traffic stop before the truth surfaced through informants and journalists. Less than a month later, Ramon's brother Benjamin was arrested, and the Tijuana cartel never recovered. December 16th, 1985. Paul Castellano pulls up to Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan, expecting a quiet dinner with his lieutenants. Castellano had taken over the Gambino family from Carlo Gambino in 1976 and ran it like a corporation, while banning his soldiers from dealing drugs under penalty of death. That rule infuriated Queen's capo, John Gotti, whose crew was deep into heroin, and Gotti knew that once Castellano found out, he was a dead man. So Gotti struck first, recruiting capo Frank DeCicco, a man Castellano had personally promoted and trusted, who arranged the Sparks meeting and tipped Gotti to the exact time, place, and seating. 4 shooters in trench coats gunned down Castellano and his bodyguard Thomas Bilotti on the sidewalk, while Gotti and Sammy Gravano watched from a car nearby, coordinating by walkie-talkie. Gotti became boss within 2 weeks, a promotion the commission never actually approved. 5 months later, DeCicco, the inside man who sold Castellano out, was killed by a car bomb outside his own home. Gotti was eventually convicted of ordering the hit and died in federal prison in 2002. Wilber Varela was the last great kingpin of Colombian cocaine, a former police sergeant who took over the Norte del Valle cartel in 2002. His organization had allegedly shipped over 500 metric tons of cocaine, worth more than $10 billion, and Washington placed a $5 million bounty on his head. By 2008, Varela was hiding in the Venezuelan mountains, paying off generals and politicians to survive, believing he was untouchable. He was wrong. His own 2 top lieutenants had cut a deal with rival trafficker Daniel El Loco Barrera, trading Varela's smuggling routes for his life while keeping everything else for themselves. On the night of January 29th, 2008, Varela was asleep at a mountain resort near Mérida with his bodyguard El Grasoso in the next room. His driver, sent out before dawn for breakfast, returned to find bullet holes in the cabin door and fled without going inside. Varela and his bodyguard were found dead. It took forensics 32 fingerprint points just to confirm the body, since Varela had been traveling under a false identity. The Colombian newspaper El Tiempo summed it up in one headline: "The capo was killed by his own people." His son was murdered the following year, and within 5 years, everyone involved was dead or in a U.S. prison. Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, a former commander in Mexico's DFS intelligence agency, co-founded what became the Juarez Cartel after Pablo Acosta's death in 1987, bringing in a younger lieutenant, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, to run operations. For 5 years, Carrillo Fuentes quietly built his own network, contacts, and smuggling routes inside Aguilar's own organization, and waited. By 1993, Aguilar Guajardo was a fugitive with $100 million in seized assets, allegedly threatening to expose his government contacts if he wasn't protected. That April, while vacationing with 15 family members at a Cancun resort, he walked out of a restaurant with his wife and 11-year-old son when gunmen opened fire from across the boulevard, killing him and an American tourist and wounding his family. Carrillo Fuentes took over the cartel within 48 hours, later becoming known as El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies, for smuggling cocaine in his own fleet of Boeing 727s. He lasted 4 years, dying in 1997 during plastic surgery meant to help him evade capture. The surgeons who operated on him were later found dead in oil drums. The Juarez cartel survived it all and still operates today. Carmine the Cigar, Galante, was an old-school mafia killer linked to as many as 100 murders dating back to 1926. After his 1974 prison release, he tried to seize the Bonanno family and the entire New York heroin market, importing Sicilian gunmen called Zips as his personal bodyguards and telling everyone he was untouchable. The commission decided he was finished, and the plan ran straight through his own bodyguards, Cesare Bonventre and Baldo Amato, who were offered promotions and a bigger cut of the family's drug rackets to stand down. On July 12, 1979, as Galante ate lunch on a Bushwick restaurant patio, flanked by his bodyguards, 3 masked gunmen walked in. Bonventre and Amato sat completely still, never reaching for a weapon. Shotgun and pistol fire killed Galante and 2 others at the table. The resulting photo showed Galante on his back, cigar still clenched in his teeth. Bonventre and Amato walked away unharmed and were both promoted to capo as their reward. Bonventre was murdered 5 years later. Amato is serving a life sentence today, and only one of the 3 shooters was ever convicted. Roy DeMeo ran the most prolific killing crew in American mafia history, tied to more than 200 murders out of Brooklyn's Gemini Lounge. By 1982, with an informant cooperating against him and a second grand jury subpoena looming, Gambino boss Paul Castellano feared DeMeo would crack and take the whole family down. So he gave the contract to DeMeo's own mentor, Anthony Nino Gaggi, the man who had recruited DeMeo into the mob back in 1965 and vouched for him for nearly 20 years. On January 10, 1983, DeMeo was lured to a Brooklyn auto shop for what he thought was a routine sit-down. He took off his coat, turned to face Gaggi, and realized what was happening only when it was too late. Gaggi opened fire the instant DeMeo removed his jacket, while DeMeo's own crew watched without lifting a finger. 10 days later, his body was found frozen in the trunk of his own car at a Sheepshead Bay boat club. Gaggy went to prison 3 years later on an unrelated murder charge and died there in 1988. Albert Anastasia was called the Lord High Executioner of Murder Incorporated, running the killing arm of the American Mafia through the 1930s and 40s. By 1957, he headed what would become the Gambino family, which made him a problem. His underboss, Carlo Gambino, was secretly conspiring with Vito Genovese to remove him, and the plot required Anastasia's own bodyguard, Anthony Coppola, to step aside at the critical moment. On October 25, 1957, after Anastasia was driven to Manhattan's Park Sheraton Hotel, his chauffeur parked and walked away, and Coppola also stepped from his post moments before the attack, whether by design or convenience was never resolved. Anastasia settled into a barbershop chair inside the hotel and leaned back under a hot towel. 2 masked gunmen walked in seconds later and fired 10 shots. Anastasia rose disoriented and lunged at his attackers' reflections in the mirror before collapsing on the tile floor. The shooters were never officially identified. Carlo Gambino, the inside man who set the plot in motion, took over the family that still bears his name, running it for 2 decades before dying of natural causes in 1976. Rosario Riccobono was boss of a Sicilian Mafia clan and a member of the Sicilian Mafia Commission. During the Second Mafia War, he switched sides to support Toto Riina's brutal Corleonese faction, helping lure rival loyalists to their deaths. But Riina didn't trust a man who had already betrayed once, so he decided Riccobono's entire organization had to be wiped out, not just him, but every man around him. On November 30th, 1982, Riccobono and roughly 8 trusted men were invited to a feast at a fellow commission member's estate outside Palermo. Riccobono ate, drank, and then did what he always did afterward, fell asleep in his chair. That nap was the signal. According to Sicilian Mafia informants who later testified, each of his men was quietly separated during dessert and strangled by the very man sitting beside him. Their own bodyguards were the ones doing the strangling. An enforcer named Pino Greco personally garroted Riccobono in his chair. He never woke up. The bodies were dissolved in acid and none were ever found, and Riccobono's brother was decapitated days later. The entire clan ceased to exist in a single afternoon, and Riina consolidated total control over the Sicilian Mafia. José Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, nicknamed El Mexicano, was one of the 4 founding partners of the Medellin cartel, alongside Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers, and Forbes named him a billionaire in 1988. Gacha ran the cartel's enforcement squads, financed Colombia's right-wing death squads, and once handed out nearly $200,000 in cash to homeless peasants to buy loyalty. By December 1989, every law enforcement agency in 2 countries was hunting him. He kept 25 bodyguards at all times and moved constantly between safe houses until the breakthrough came from inside his own ranks. A man known as El Navegante, allegedly a Cali cartel informant planted years earlier inside Gacha's circle, fed authorities his exact location. On December 15, 1989, search block helicopters caught Gacha, his teenage son, and several bodyguards fleeing on foot near the coast and cut them down with machine gun fire. Pablo Escobar, watching from Medellin, understood instantly that the state had reached deep inside Gacha's own security detail. Escobar himself would be hunted down and killed 3 years later. Joe, the boss, Masseria, wanted to be boss of everything. one of the two warring kings of New York's Castellammarese War in the early 1930s, treating his street captains as cannon fodder while collecting tribute from every borough. His right-hand man, a young Sicilian nicknamed Lucky Luciano, was secretly negotiating with rival boss Salvatore Maranzano. Kill Masseria, end the war, split his rackets. Luciano lined up gunmen including Vito Genovese, Albert Anastasia, Joe Adonis, and Bugsy Siegel. On April 15, 1931, Luciano took Masseria to lunch in Coney Island. After the meal, he excused himself to the bathroom, and within a minute, 4 gunmen walked in and shot Masseria dead at the card table. Masseria's own bodyguards had mysteriously vanished from the restaurant beforehand, having been bought off by Luciano. Maranzano then declared himself boss of all bosses and restructured the Mafia into the 5 families, only to try having Luciano killed next. Tipped off by an ally embedded inside Maranzano's own camp, Luciano struck first. On September 10, 1931, 4 men posing as government agents disarmed Maranzano's unarmed bodyguards at his Park Avenue office and stabbed and shot him to death, triggering the coordinated Night of the Sicilian Vespers killings across the country. Luciano abolished the title of boss of all bosses and created the commission that would govern the American Mafia for the next 90 years. Sam Momo Giancana ran the Chicago outfit through the 1950s and 60s, allegedly helped rig Cook County's vote in the 1960 election for John F. Kennedy, and worked with the CIA on plots against Fidel Castro. By 1975, outfit boss Tony Accardo had grown nervous because Giancana was scheduled to testify the next morning before the Senate Church Committee, which was investigating those CIA plots. Accardo decided that flight was never going to happen. On the night of June 19, 1975, Giancana was alone in the basement kitchen of his Oak Park home, frying sausage, escarole, and beans. The FBI surveillance team supposed to be watching his house had been pulled off duty, and there was no forced entry, meaning Giancana had let his own killer in himself. He was shot once in the back of the head with a silenced .22 pistol while standing at the stove, then 6 more times. The prime suspect was his own longtime driver and aide, Dominic Butch Blasi, the last person seen with him. The case remains officially unsolved, and Giancana never testified before the Senate. 12 men, 12 organizations, 1 pattern. In nearly every case, the boss wasn't taken down by police, by rivals, or by federal agents. He was taken down by the very people he paid to keep him alive. The bodyguard who stepped away, the lieutenant who set the meeting, the mentor who pulled the trigger, the aide who let the killer in through the kitchen door. The lesson of organized crime at every level, in every country, in every decade, is brutally consistent. The day you stop being useful to the people around you is the day you become a liability. And in this world, liabilities are erased, not by your enemies, but by your friends. If you want more deep dives into hidden worlds like this, subscribe now and don't miss the next story.